If you're a fan of B-movies, then you know the moment that Maniac Cop opens with the credit of being a Larry Cohen production, you're in for filmmaking of a pretty low standard. Larry Cohen, of course, is the creator behind such films as Full Moon High and It's Alive 3, Island of the Alive. I feel like a filmmaker behind titles like that gives you a pretty clear expectation of what kind of product they put out.
Delightfully Devilish, Seymour.
Yes everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devillish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we're going back to the slasher craze of the 1980s to look at one of the more notorious examples, Maniac Cop. Maniac Cop's opening credits play out as a mysterious figure named Cordell dresses in his police uniform. The scene actually drags on forever, and the film literally pauses every time a new name pops up. I took this as the initial sign that the film didn't have way too many ideas and was trying to pad out its running time. But to its credit, I did see a couple of interesting names pop up on the opening credits. You have B-movie stars such as Tom Atkins, Bruce Campbell from Evil Dead, and Richard Roundtree from Shaft. There's even some guy named Will Smith. But perhaps the best name to pop up on the intro credits is Robert Z'Dar, because for fans of bad movies and B-movies, Robert Z'Dar is notorious. One of his most prominent films is Samurai Cop, which is frequently listed as one of the greatest bad movies ever made. The first 4 minutes of Maniac Cop seem to go on forever before the film finally begins with a waitress being harassed by some locals, running from them and then suddenly spotting a police officer out of the blue. We don't actually see him, of course, because he's off screen at first and then he's in the shadows, so how this waitress managed to spot him and quickly identify that he was a police officer goes beyond me, but whatever. She calls out the word officer no less than 4 times. She runs up to him, tries to explain the situation, and upon looking at his face makes a half-assed attempt to be shocked. The police officer picks her up, breaks her neck, and drops her. Now all I could think when this scene was happening was, why? Why did he kill her? He was just a guy standing in the street, she just happened to run up to him. There was no context or circumstance there. Obviously that's going to come into place as the story goes on, but this feels like too much of an obscure and random murder to just open the film on. In the next scene, we see the 2 Puerto Ricans that were chasing the girl arrested by the police. And this scene makes no sense if you actually think about it. You'd think that after they had tried to attack a girl and then witness an actual police officer murder her in cold blood, that they'd try to get the fuck out of there instead of standing around and just getting arrested. And why is it suddenly daytime? I mean, for this arrest to logically have taken place, the police would have had to have come to the scene where the other police officer had murdered the girl, picked up the Puerto Ricans, maybe made a quick run to Denny's and then eaten food for about 6 hours and then been like, alright, it's daytime, let's take these guys to prison now. Now, it's not typical that you should be overthinking slasher films, but the silliness and inconsistency really sets you up for the rest of the movie. Anyway, after a few scenes of pointless dialogue, we get another murder. This time, the titular cop approaches a couple and kills this guy, but he lets the girl go. Now, this is explained later on as him wanting to leave a witness at the scene, but it doesn't explain where the fuck he actually disappeared to in this shot. Shortly after, there's another murder where the Maniac Cop handcuffs a guy and then sticks his face into a cement-like substance while he has an epileptic seizure. And this is the most poorly executed death scene in the entire film, but the standard for death scenes does not rise very highly above this one, unfortunately. Often the pinnacle of a good slasher film is how well the murders are done, how creatively the characters are killed. That's what people are here to see. And so far, Maniac Cop shows none of that. And as the film goes on, you'll start to see that none of the others are particularly memorable, with the exception of this cement murder, because it's just that bad. It's mentioned to us that Atkins' character, Frank, has Frank.
Hi, ladies. I'm Frank. Shit.
It's mentioned that Frank has potentially attempted suicide in the past year while dealing with the grief of having lost his partner in the line of duty.
As a matter of fact, didn't you try to shoot yourself a couple of years back? Gun went off.
But this scene proves to be literally the only mention of or hint towards this plot point in the entire film. The rest of the feature does nothing to expand upon this or give him any sense of character development. And this actually signifies a big problem with a lot of the themes in Maniac Cop. Every single time Maniac Cop has a good idea, it just throws it away and falls back onto the pattern of being a lazy B-movie. I mean, the concept of a police officer being the central villain in a slasher film, going around abusing his power and murdering people, that is very atypical of villains in slasher films. It's pretty subversive. And it ends up progressing into this theme where the community develops a huge distrust for the police force because they know one of them is out trying to kill people. There is a very well done scene in Maniac Cop where after hearing the news report of a killer police officer, a woman actually freaks over while another police officer approaches her. She pulls out a gun and shoots him point blank, thinking he could be the killer. I mean, the level of distrust between the community and the police could become a very good theme in this film. But after it's used for the gimmick of having a stray civilian kill a police officer, it's completely forgotten about. The next scene repeats a similar sin. We finally get to see Bruce Campbell, the actor that we're all really here to see. He's a police officer who keeps on disappearing late at night and being very secretive about it, causing his wife to suspect that he could be the killer. Maniac Cop could use the mystery behind this idea to create a whodunit theme that goes across the film, having the audience suspect that every police officer could be a potential killer. But then the very next scene reveals what he's actually been doing in the night, thus killing the mystery, and killing it with a very melodramatic and ridiculous scene. But I'll get to that in a second. This scene in question has Bruce Campbell and his character's wife talking about how their marriage is falling apart, and it consistently just keeps on getting distracted. They talk about the emotional distance between each other and how therapy isn't helping. But then suddenly she wants him to stay the night. He says he can't, but he'll take her away on the weekend. Then suddenly she's distant enough to be scared of him. And then once again he's focused on getting out of the building. Maniac Cop cannot decide whether they want this relationship to be a disintegrating romantic tragedy or one that has a flicker of hope, because the dialogue keeps oscillating back and forth between both themes. In the end, the dialogue stops trying to contribute anything to the story and then starts existing solely so that the characters are just filling the dead air with something to say. I mean, the last thing she says to him before he's going out is "be careful," and this is his response.
Be careful now.
You say that every night.
Wow. That was the best they could come up with. You know, not him looking her in the eyes and saying, "I'll try," in an emotional commitment to her. Not him just staring blankly at her as he ponders the pain of his destroyed relationship and the fear of being out on the street dealing with a potentially killer police officer. Just an emotionless acknowledgement that, yes, she said some words. And then he's gone. But wait, here comes a phone call. When the phone starts ringing, there's a shift in music, and we're suddenly supposed to be scared. Yeah, the audience has to pretend like that whole melodramatic, pointless conversation didn't just happen and kill any sense of atmosphere in the film. Someone on the other end of the line is harassing her with claims that her husband is the killer, feeding her paranoia. So she follows him. And the mystery is over when we find out that he's just been having an affair. She pulls a gun on both of them and then runs away, knocking down a lamp in dramatic effect. Bruce Campbell's character Jack then goes and sits back down, and you can see a fraction of his underwear. Now obviously he's supposed to have been banging this girl, and the camera is positioned to hide the fact that he's probably naked. But once you see out the edge of that camera that he's wearing underwear, suddenly the illusion is gone. I mean, the editors on this film couldn't even crop the shot to hide that much. And the fact that he's not actually naked is another one of the film's downfalls. I mean, Maniac Cop could boast the gimmick of having Bruce Campbell's dong in it. I know for a fact I would want to see that. I'm sure Bruce Campbell hangs some major dong.
Where's the dong?
Well, I think that the studio was thinking the gratuitous nudity was maybe a bit much.
Fuck you.
Bullshit!
Then we get a shot of the motel sign, the budget inn. Now I don't know if that's supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek poke at the fact that this film had a low budget, but that's actually kind of funny when you think about it. And then Jack's wife, Ellen, gets snatched by the Maniac Cop on the way out. Then we get another confusing scene. Housekeeping comes by the next day, and she makes it an effort to comment on the lamp being knocked over.
Must have partied it up good in here.
Oh yeah, it's always the sign of a great party when someone knocks a lamp over. I bet Jay Gatsby was knocking lamps over all the time when he had those massive parties in the 1920s. That was what made him the Great Gatsby. The maid walks in and finds Ellen's body, and this turns Jack into the major suspect of being the Maniac Cop. But hang on, this scene also does not make sense.
That does not make sense. I am not making any sense. None of this makes sense.
First of all, Jack paid to stay the night at a motel room, so he's obviously going to be staying there till morning. He can't return back to his because he doesn't want to encounter his wife who's just walked in on him cheating on her, and he can't go back to that girl's apartment, otherwise they would have been using that for their rendezvous in the first place. Second of all, that would mean that the Maniac Cop would have had to have kidnapped Ellen, waited until the next day, waited until Jack actually left his motel room, then somehow gotten in and murdered Ellen right there, because the fresh blood obviously signifies that she wasn't killed the night before and then left there. But the timing doesn't add up on this. I mean, if there was witnesses to the Puerto Ricans committing the crime earlier, then there's gotta be witnesses going on at a very big motel. I mean, the staff would have seen something. And thirdly, Jack is a police officer, okay? If he wants to murder someone, he's gonna do it in a way that's a lot less conspicuous. He's not gonna take his wife to a motel room where he's gonna have to register and be seen by people, then murder her, and then leave her corpse to be found the next day. I mean, the police department can't honestly expect Jack as a police officer to be that stupid. But apparently they do. When Jack is told his wife was murdered and found in his motel room, his reaction is priceless.
Since your wife was found dead in a motel room, in a sleaze bag motor inn on 11th Avenue, with her throat slit from ear to ear.
No, you gotta be wrong.
He slit his throat from ear to ear.
Hey, I'm trying to eat lunch here.
Bruce Campbell is so emotionless and hollow here, and it's just hilarious. And that line,
You gotta be wrong.
"The captain just told you exactly where they found her body, and you know for a fact she was there the night before. There's no way he can be wrong on that. And if you want to argue that he's just having an emotional reaction, he has no emotions. I mean, look at him.
You gotta be wrong.
Then we have a scene in the bar where we see people on the news voicing their distrust for the police. So again, we get the film hinting at a community of people not having trust in the police force anymore. But again, it doesn't continue. And it's even worse in this scene because it's so poorly executed. We just see several people on the TV voice their distrust for the police, and this could not be more obviously artificial. The filmmakers haven't even bothered to edit this in a style that makes it resemble any kind of a news report or anything. Surely after the interviews are done, you hear a brief voiceover saying, "This is a news report," or some shit like that.
Much crime no more.
Hey, listen. About 18 years.
But it's lazy and it's off screen and the damage is already done by that point. Then there's a scene where Jack's mistress, who turns out to be a police officer named Teresa Mallory, is on duty pretending to be a hooker. Every time she speaks, it's really fucking annoying.
Yeah, I feel pretty much at home right here.
She sounds like a genuine bimbo. She chews gum so loudly that it's irritating. And frankly, I can't tell whether she's an actual police officer or an actual street whore, because she's not convincing as either of them.
You got it, mister. You asked the jackpot question. Now, why don't you run along home to your wife and kids like a good little boy?
Oof, I already want to hit you.
She gets attacked by the Maniac Cop, but her and Frank fight back and shoot him a bunch of times. We keep on seeing bullets hit his torso because we're still not allowed to see his face yet. And even after running out of bullets, Teresa proceeds to try and shoot him 4 times.
The first thing you're going to want to do is really make your father's heart hurt. Yeah, he's not proud.
So we gather that Officer Mallory is an idiot, and that's reinforced by this line.
It couldn't have just been a bulletproof vest. I hit him in the head at least twice.
No, you fucking didn't. Every single bullet hit him in the torso. That's exactly what the shot showed us. And if you want to argue that one of the bullets hit him in the head off screen, then when you see the Maniac Cop's face later, you'll notice there's no bullet wounds to his face. So this is either a continuity issue or a script issue, but it's an issue. But everything takes a whole new turn here because Officer Mallory mentions that the Maniac Cop had ice-cold hands and wasn't breathing.
And they felt like ice, even through his gloves. He wasn't breathing.
So we're not just dealing with a Maniac Cop here, we're dealing with a zombie Maniac Cop apparently. Now, one of the most iconic killers in slasher films is the undead Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th films, and Maniac Cop has in fact been criticized for quickly becoming a Friday the 13th clone. Now keep that comment in mind because that comes back later on. It's worth noting that now 2 police officers have witnessed the Maniac Cop in action, so 2 authority figures can testify that while someone else was in prison being blamed for these crimes, another person was out actually doing them, thus proving that Jack is therefore innocent of the crimes. He has the most airtight alibi for not committing these crimes, and 2 police officers who witnessed him not doing them. But the rest of the police force is just like, yeah, nah, you're staying in there. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't trust the police force either if they were this incompetent.
To the punk-ass cop backstage.
Next we have Frank pursuing a suspicious contact named Officer Sally Noland. He asks her to deliver some documents to inspect her behaviour, and after doing that, he says, "Never mind, I don't need these documents, bye." He's not in the least bit subtle about this. He's very obviously trying to figure something out about her. He stalks her and finds that she's linked to someone named Matt, who is involved in a scheme to kill the mayor and the commissioner. We gather that she's talking to the Maniac Cop himself, and even while she knows that the police he's been killing are innocent, she's apparently in love with this guy's hand. It's like Quentin Tarantino and Feet. Finally, we get to learn the identity of the killer and see his backstory, which begins with a black judge just emotionlessly hitting his gavel again and again and again. We learn that police officer Matthew Cordell is the killer. He was a police officer with an increased tendency towards violence against criminals, who was framed and put in prison to cover up the corruption on City Hall that he was closing in on. He becomes deformed and murdered in prison, establishing his motivation. Now, this doesn't establish how he's come back from the dead, just that he is in fact undead. You don't actually learn how he came back from the dead until Maniac Cop 3, but believe me, it's not worth sticking around for that one. While Frank is being investigated further, Sally comes in screaming and starts whacking him with her cane before limping away and getting killed by her cold-handed serial killer boyfriend. Yeah, good, she was annoying, I'm glad she's gone. Then out of the blue, he kills Frank. This actually took me by surprise, because Tom Atkins always survives to the end in horror movies. So while this is going on, Jack breaks out of prison and pulls the gun on someone trying to stop him, but doesn't shoot, because you know he's not the Maniac Cop, he's not going to kill people. He goes to investigate further. Cordell tracks them down and starts killing again. And even though the police chase the killer into the building, Jack is still apparently the main suspect, so they lock him up in a van. A chase ensues, Cordell starts axing down the door. And notice just how not terrifying this scene is. With the B-movie style cinematography and repetitive sound effects, this whole scene just feels empty. Clearly the filmmakers were trying to pay tribute to the Here's Johnny scene from The Shining, but they were only willing to copy the idea and not the technique. Jack, being in handcuffs, decides to run right at the door for whatever reason.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
And this is the point in the video where I'm gonna have to stop trying to understand the motivations for these characters. I'm just done. I'm done trying to explain the plot holes and weird character motivations. There is so many bad things to focus on in this film that I've got to focus on stuff that's not gonna kill me to speak about. All I can think in this scene is that the director pointed the camera at Bruce Campbell and was like, alright, just do something. And Bruce Campbell's like, well, my hands are tied, so guess I'll run? Like, at the door? So he trips over, gets picked up by Cordell, and we finally get to see the undead Cordell's face. But as you can see, no bullet wounds. Teresa points a shotgun at Cordell, but doesn't even try to shoot, even when she has a clear window while Jack is flying through the air. Cordell then runs. Jack chases after him. There's an emotionless fight on the vehicle, and Cordell drives right into a suspended pipe which impales him. It doesn't even seem like he tries to drive away. He doesn't even try to find a safe route. He sees a pipe and he just drives right at it. And you can clearly see that he had the time to gather an awareness and drive out of the way, but he just doesn't. So the suspended pipe impales him, and then he screams. So apparently he can communicate. He'll scream when he gets impaled by a pipe. Apparently not when he's getting shot in the chest repeatedly. And apparently in the face. He drives into the water. There's a very long slow motion crash. Now we know he's going to go Jason Voorhees and rise out of the water to come back for vengeance, but I have to explain again why this scene makes no sense. So we know that the police are incompetent because they've spent the entire film blaming Jack for the murders, even though there is extensive evidence repeatedly that he's innocent. So in this scene, we've just had another murder, and the only two witnesses to it are the person that's being blamed for the murders and the other police officer who's been repeatedly claiming that he's innocent but hasn't been believed by anyone. And since they can't find the body of Matt Cordell, that means they should not be able to place him at the scene. So that means the only suspect they can actually place at the scene is Jack. And like I said, they've spent the entire film blaming him for all the murders, despite all the evidence on the contrary. So by that rationale, they should believe Jack's guilty, right? Nah, he's innocent, because the film has no more running time left. Cordell returns and commits a pathetic off-screen murder of the mayor, who was one of the people responsible for his imprisonment. Then the credits roll. So, is Maniac Cop a good film?
No, 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 no.
Maniac Cop's issues go far beyond the lack of proper continuity, the errors in the dialogue, and the B-movie production values. And the cast isn't particularly bad, even though some of the characters get annoying. The main problem with Maniac Cop is simply that it wastes its great potential. The premise to the story has a lot more sophistication than most slasher films. It's not about a mysterious entity just killing naked teenagers having sex. It's about someone in a position of power going out and abusing it and creating a disharmony between the community and the authority of the police force. Police brutality and officers abusing their power is still a very relevant topic today, so Maniac Cop could have actually been a timeless film. But despite tantalizing us with the potential of its premise, it just falls flat on a generic path. The killer spends the whole film focusing on no-name victims instead of the people actually responsible for his murder, and all the kills he executes are very dull. Even if he's killing innocent civilians to frame another police officer or just create distrust between cops and people, the filmmakers lack the conviction to follow through on this theme. And on top of that, it's really hard to sympathize for any of the characters, because while the villain is also a victim, he's killing the complete wrong people. Whereas other characters are in the wrong because they're cheating on their wife, because they're idiotic police officers, or because they're downright fucking annoying. RoboCop was a 1980s film which had a really great female police officer. Whereas with Maniac Cop, the two female police officers just feel like Willie from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The one character that we should sympathize with is Frank. He's dealing with the grief of having lost someone in the line previously, he's trying to do right to make sure that no one else dies, and he ends up being one of the victims, but the film never fleshes out his character. Tom Atkins gives a perfectly serviceable performance of the character. He's actually probably the best actor in the film, but the film itself just doesn't give him a character for us to care about. Maniac Cop is a bad film because it takes a great concept, falls flat onto a generic path, and then doesn't even sustain itself with the proper gimmicks of a good slasher film. The best thing that could be said about Maniac Cop is that it led to Maniac Cop 2, which is a far superior film. It went far more over the top as a horror film and actually tried to delve deeper into its characters and its themes. It at least had the conviction to try to follow through on the deeper potential of the story. Even director William Lustig, who made all three Maniac Cop films, considers Maniac Cop 2 to be his best film. He calls it a terrific B-movie, definitely the best of the trilogy. All this being said, for the most die-hard slasher fans, Maniac Cop might actually just have enough to entertain. Even if it doesn't explore the potential of its story, the narrative is still inherently different enough to separate itself from other teen-based slasher films. That and the fact that there's a whole list of B-movie stars in the cast gives the film a major gimmick. And the production values are pretty good. I mean, even when I wasn't completely invested in the police procedural setting of the story, I was fully convinced by it. And if, like me, you want to be hypercritical when watching this film, then Maniac Cop does actually have enough moments where you can stop and laugh at just how ridiculous it is. So if you're screening a bad movie for you and your friends to make crude comments at, Maniac Cop definitely has a lot for you to be talking about. One of those things could be the fact that the police officer only kills white people, which is pretty uncommon in contemporary society. Personally, even though I didn't love Maniac Cop, I still do rank it higher than any of the Friday the 13th films I've seen. And any of the Halloween sequels, with the exception of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and the 2018 Halloween film. And if I was a die-hard slasher fan, I could definitely see myself liking Maniac Cop a lot more. Maniac Cop gets 4 acts of police brutality out of 10. It's a waste of a great concept with ridiculous plotting and poor death scenes, but it might have you laughing all the way through to Maniac Cop 2, which is objectively a far better movie. Just don't bother with the third one, the filmmakers really got lost on that one. So that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. I've been your host, Jukebox Harry. If you have ideas for films you want me to discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below, or hit the subscribe button if you want to see more episodes. Until next time, peace.